Thanks so much, Victoria. I'm waiting for the recording to start. Is it started?
It's on.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Hi, everybody. My name is Alexandra Pickett. You may know me as Alex. I use she, her, ella pronouns, and I am the director of online teaching at SUNY Online. As you come into the room, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and what campus you are from and your interest in DEI or online course quality, that would help me to know who's in the room. I am a co-lead on this national project. You can see my other co-leads on this project, Sally, Jeff, and Ashley. Talk a little bit more about them in a minute. I am also Oscar's mom. Oscar is our online course quality rubric, and I have been shepherding and leading and designing aspects of Oscar for years. And I'm also an online adjunct, or have been at SUNY Albany in the Department of Education Theory and Practice, teaching in the master's program there. My course is Introduction to Online Teaching, and I've taught that course for many years. It's a master's level course. I'm also a PhD student at UAlbany, and I am studying, I'm interested and studying how people think about the nature of knowledge and how that impacts their pedagogy. And I'm particularly interested in that in STEM online faculty. And I'm also a mom, and I have a fur baby who's 15, and I have a human baby who is going to be 22 tomorrow. And so that's a little about me. I'm also an instructional designer. I know a bit about online teaching and learning. I've been doing this for quite a long time here at SUNY. And so I'm here to talk to you about this amazing project that we have been working on for the past year and a half. And so today I'm going to give you a little overview of the project, a little bit about our goals and how we work. And then it's kind of like a status of where we are with the project and some of the things that we have been learning as a result of our work of trying to infuse diversity, equity, and inclusion into online effective practices. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about our status and our themes. And then I'm going to give you a demonstration of the platform, and then hopefully we'll have time to do an interactive exercise that I've set up for us to do, because I recognize that there are many folks in the room who are faculty, who are instructional designers, who may have expertise in DEI in some way or another. And so I want to invite you all to contribute to this project and to collaborate on it. And so I'll give you, we'll do an interactive activity after I demonstrate the platform to you. Everything that I'm going to show you, you can find in your goodie bag, which is in the bit.ly that you see on the screen. And maybe, Victoria, if you could put that bit.ly in the screen. It's DEI for all, and it is case sensitive. If you don't have a chance to get that now, I will put it in at the end when I'm out of sharing my full screen here. So let's get started here. The first thing that I want to do is to have you go to Mentimeter, and the voting code is 266921. So just go to mentimeter.com and put in the code 726691. And I'm going to exit and take you over there. And the first thing, the first question is, here's the code for that. The first question is, which course design rubric do you use? And there are a number of them that are out there. You may be familiar with Quality Matters. You may be familiar with Oscar. Over in California, they use CBC, OEI, and COLT, and there are others. And maybe you don't know what a course design rubric is. So if you go ahead and tell us, who you are, what rubric you may use or be aware of? All right, so we have some people starting to vote. Thank you. All right, so we got a lot of Oscar friends in the house. We have a couple of Quality Matters people, a couple of people who are unsure what a rubric is or a course design rubric is, somebody who uses something else. For the whoever's using something else, if you would put what you're using in the chat, and if it's a homegrown thing or if it's, if it's something that has a name, I'd love, and if there's a URL to it, I'd love to know what that is. As part of this project, one of the aspects of it is to align the inclusive teaching, online teaching practices with any course quality rubric that's out there. So I'd be interested. All right. So looks like we have a number of people who voted. Let's go to the next slide. And when you're thinking about infusing DEI into your online instruction, whether you're an instructional designer or a faculty person or a student, whoever you happen to be, how does it make you feel? How do you feel about the thought of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what that means to you in terms of your instruction or the course or the design? Okay, here we go. Underprepared, challenging, creative, enthusiastic, interested, hopeful. Awesome. Accomplished, excellent. Necessary, excited. All right. Well, I'll leave this up here. So as you look at this and think about this, you can return to this and add your thoughts. I'm going to go back to my slides and continue. So in terms of giving you a brief overview of the project, I want to make sure that you know that what we are doing here is not creating another rubric. There are currently a lot of rubrics out there, and there is a lot of work currently being done to directly address DEI in various contexts. And so you may be aware that Quality Matters recently put out a guide on culturally responsive course design. Quality Matters in the 7th edition is featuring more information on DEI. There is a recent update to the California state system that now includes DEI standards. UDL has their Rising Equity Initiative, if you're familiar with UDL. Every Learner Everywhere is another national organization that has their equity equation. And the Online Learning Consortium has a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force and is working on aspects of that. So there are also several notable equity first rubrics that are dedicated exclusively to DEI. And so I have 2 examples of those that are most notable. The first is the Peralta Community College Online Equity Rubric, and they have an annual event that's free and virtual. And if you are interested in this topic, the Peralta Conference is an excellent event. It is actually how I began this project. Was at the first, I think it will be the 3rd annual this year, but at the first one a couple of years ago, Sally, Jeff, and I connected, and that's how this project was actually born. The other the other rubric, quality equity first rubric, is run by Melissa Coe at Stanford University. Also incredible work that's being done that is, very focused primarily on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So for this project, our objectives are to enhance all national online quality rubrics with DEI strategies that any instructional designer or any online instructor could use in various contexts. And so we started out, the three of us, Sally, Jeff, and I, and it quickly, we decided to, it sort of just mushroomed, that we started inviting more people to collaborate and to participate in the project with us. And the goals of it in general are to offer specifics, suggestions, and strategies with examples and how-to type practices that target specific inclusive teaching practices that have been adapted specifically for online teaching and learning environments. And then what we want to do, have done, is align these inclusive teaching practices for online with OSCAR standards, with Quality Matters standards and categories, with the COLT rubric, and with CVC OEI, and any other ones that are out there, so that you, no matter which tool you use, you would be able to look at your course quality, your online course quality standards with the lens of the rubric that you already use. So the other piece of this that is really important, and that I brought to this project actually, is to create this resource as a freely available and openly licensed tool. And that's why I'm here at this OER Summit, because this tool will be openly licensed, will be free for anyone to use anywhere in any context. And so in addition to that, we wanted to make sure that the inclusive online teaching practices addressed both design and facilitation in a course, because there are aspects of both that are important in this work. And we also wanted to include citations and theories and research that support the DEI practices, so that it's not just, me or Jeff or whoever saying so, that there's really scholarly work and theoretical foundations under the recommendations that we are annotating. And then we wanted to also put this into a platform that would allow you to explore the annotations in ways that are independent from online course quality standards. So you'd be able to look at all of the inclusive teaching practices through the lenses of these different rubrics, but you'd also be able to look at them in a standalone way. And just so that you know, SUNY is a part of this project, not just me. We have a number of people who are identified from across the system for their expertise, either in instructional design, as online faculty, or as DEI experts. And they are participating in this project alongside everyone else who is doing this with us. So we started with 54 inclusive teaching practices developed by an initiative out of Cal State LA, which is where Jeff Suarez grant is at. And what we did was with our writing teams, and we formed 13 writing teams made up of about 90 individuals, each person representing a primary role, either as an instructional designer, an online faculty person, or someone with DEI expertise. So we formed 13 writing groups with representatives from those three roles, evenly distributed throughout those, throughout each group, each writing group. We have about 60 institutions currently represented in this project. There's 2 international, one in Canada and one in Brazil. And we have divided the practices, those 54, across the writing teams, and we assign what we call writing sprints monthly to each group. And then the group meets however they would like to meet, whether it's asynchronously or synchronously or however they want to do it. And they work on annotating the practice, adapting the practice for online first, and then annotating it. And then we meet, all of us together monthly, to share, to peer review, to present. We do some interactive activities with the co-leads, design interactive activities for the writing group, the larger group, to do things like help us to categorize, help us with keywords, help us with coding for each of the rubrics, those kinds of things. And then peer review, I think I mentioned that already. I want to show you the course homepage. So this is the project website, and this is like the front page of that. And I wanted to show you the collaborators. So these, I know that's kind of small, but just to give you a sense of all of the different institutions and all of the different individuals that are currently involved. And then down here at the end of the page is a form that you can fill out if you would be interested in participating in the project in some way. There's lots of different ways that you can engage in this project. Then in terms of our work, we use a Canvas shell to organize all of our work, and for announcements and for access to the different tools and materials that that we're using. We give each writing team a template, and we have it outlined so that they know what they're doing when they're annotating a practice. And right now, we've been doing this for about 1.5 years now, and we're in the stage, most of the practices are drafted, and we're in the stage now of finalizing drafts and editing. And we have Ashley, who's joined us more recently as our lead, as our editor, to help us to establish editorial standards and to make sure that we're being consistent in terms of voice and language and so forth. So I'm just showing you, this is our working, each group is assigned a practice, and then these are their instructions, essentially, of the things that they're currently working on. And just to give you a sense of, of where we're at with that and how we work. All right, let's go back to the slideshow. And so as of October now, 2023, we have consolidated down from 54 of those initial inclusive teaching standards, which were for regular teaching, face-to-face teaching, down to 49 inclusive online practices. And we've revised and annotated or drafted about 84% of them. I think we've done 41 of the 49 practices we're considering in some form of a draft or another. 13 of those 49 are pretty close to complete and are in the platform and can be shared in their various states of completion. I'm going to share those 13 with you today, and you can poke around them and see, what we have. We've begun categorizing and coding these practices, and according to the various rubrics, as I mentioned, and as I also mentioned, the editorial process has begun. Well, the platform that we're using is called Notion, and that allows us, essentially, it's a database that allows us to code and sort and categorize and display these inclusive teaching practices very nicely. And we've been sharing our status and our progress and the project. Most recently, just last week, I presented at OLC Accelerate on the project. We also presented over the summer at the UDL CAST Symposium. We are going to be presenting this also at the SUNY DEISJ summit that is coming up in November. And then we'll also be presenting at the QM conference also in November. And I did want to mention that this project was recently recognized as an exemplar in the Accessible and Inclusive Tools and Processes category of the 2023 Horizon Report for supporting the holistic student experience. That's the edition. So we're getting the word out and telling people about the project and letting people know where we are with this project. There seems to be a lot of interest and support. So some of the themes that we've learned along the way across the practices, just in general, and one of the things you'll notice, because these are sort of higher level, sort of my musings about what we've been doing and what we've been seeing, is that all of these themes are not specific to DEI. They're not specific to online. It's just, these are good teaching practices, and good teaching is good teaching no matter what modality or environment you happen to do that in. And so across the practices with the DEI lens, communicating consistently is important, making expectations clear is important, building trust, and so forth. I think these strategies support a positive, inclusive learning environment where all learners can feel like they belong. Our intention with this is to look at practices that will help people, learners who are in the courses, as well as the instructors, feel seen and heard and supported in their learning journeys. And so some of the categories of types of things that I have noticed is there's three of them. Intentional connection is important across these themes. Inclusive online engagement is important and relevant, and creating a sense of belonging is the other sort of sub theme across the practices. And so in terms of building intentional connection, you want, in your online instruction and your online design of your course, you want to think about how you can create a safe and welcoming learning environment where every learner feels like they belong, like they're valued, like they're respected and included, and find out what the learner's interests are and humanize yourself. Those are ways that you can do that. You want to consider various ways that students to engage with the content and the activities that can accommodate their various individual preferences, their skills, their interests. And you want to consider varied online content presentation and engagement strategies with the intention to enhance learner participation and that sense of belonging. So some of the practices that that create this intentional connection would be things like identify unique needs and circumstances of online learners. And you can think about what one might do in order to do that in an online environment. Use inclusive language and preferred names and pronouns. And this is both in the facilitation and the design of the course. Discover social and cultural identities of learners. How would you do that in an online course? And examine subject matter critically, meaning with a critical lens. And that would be a design aspect. So again, the design and facilitation are two things that we're looking at when we're looking at these inclusive teaching practices. In the design and support of an inclusive online interactions and engagement, you want to, for example, start the course off with an activity where you could potentially co-create aspects of the course, like a online learning community agreement, for example, or design activities where learners can have input and choices into how the course is managed, for example, due dates and types of assignments and ways in which they present their responses to those assignments. You want to think about presenting content in various formats to target various preferences and abilities. You want to demonstrate and model behaviors and options for varied types of responses, meaning provide models or examples or exemplars so people can better understand your expectations, better meet your expectations, especially if they're unfamiliar, with online learning. It's good for them to have examples. Designing learning experiences and activities that allow learners to connect what they're learning in ways that are relevant and meaningful and applicable to their lives and to the real world. This is pedagogical principles, making it relevant and applicable. And then giving them opportunities to inject their course contributions and their own interests and skills into the ways that they make their thinking and their learning visible to you. So some of the practices that align with this designing and supporting an inclusive online engagement are practices like co-create an online learning community agreement, facilitate connections between subject matter and learners' prior knowledge and experience, design and practice of equitable course policies, incorporate authentic assessment, and provide online course expectations that are clear and findable. So each of those is an inclusive online teaching practice that we are in the process of annotating with examples and how-tos and suggestions. And so I'm going to show you a couple of those examples in a second. But the last theme here was to cultivate a sense of belonging. And so in this one, you want to explain the significance of offering various options for the students to demonstrate their learning and express their understanding. And some of these overlap, you can see. You want to discuss strategies for how learners can develop learner self-regulation. So things like goal setting, things like self-assessing, things like doing some metacognitive activities like self-reflection and thinking about how they learn and what helps or hinders their learning, and how they know that they've learned something. So scaffolding that in a way that supports the development of those skills. Consider methods of assessment, like any written assignments, multimedia presentations, any kinds of discussions or hands-on projects or demonstrations, and provide options. So not just one way. And this is UDL, basic. This is good instructional online design, basic, So when you're doing these things, if you are designing a course that is accessible for all, or that has these lenses of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or has good design practices just in general, you will be hitting all of these things that I'm talking about. But I think it helps to look at the practices with this lens to make sure that you are not inadvertently leaving somebody out. So you also want to aim at creating opportunities for engagement and collaboration, so you empower your learners to take ownership and control over their own learning, and to build activities that scaffold and support that. So some of the practices that help to create a sense of belonging are things like explain unwritten rules and hidden curriculum in higher education. This is especially important for first-gen students. Ensure diverse representation in your media, and engage equitably and consistently with all of your online learners, and build rapport with your learners. So that's some of the sort of higher level observations of what we have been learning. I want to do a demonstration now to show you what this platform looks like. So as I mentioned, we're using a tool called Notion, and here it comes. And what this allows us to do is to code essentially each of the practices depending on the rubric and on other things. So you can see up here across the top, there are these little breadcrumbs: Quality Matters, Oscar, CVC, OEI, and then I have the demo Oscar OLC that I did last week, which is this page that I'm going to share with you. And here are the 13 practices that I mentioned, and each of these is a tile that you can click on. So I just clicked on facilitate connection between subject matter and learners' prior knowledge and experience. And then you'll see it starts with sort of an aspirational sentence. It identifies some specific techniques. It provides an overview of the practice, this specific practice, and then there are details on how to implement the practice. And then down below, there's considerations for the modality, and that would be if you're teaching the course asynchronously, there's some considerations and challenges if you're doing, if you're teaching it synchronously, if it's hybrid, and then we have the folks who worked on this particular practice. So that's the platform, and each of these tiles is one inclusive teaching practice, and you can see this one aligns with Oscar 3, Oscar Standard 3, Oscar Standard 9, and Oscar Standard 45. You can see some of the keywords and some of the coding. It's also in, if you're familiar with Oscar, Oscar's categorized into 6 or 7 categories of types of standards, and this particular one has been coded to align with overview and information and assessment and feedback, and those 3 Oscar standards. So we've done that with each of the inclusive teaching practices, and currently of the 49, we have 13 that are in some form, ready to be looked at. They're not totally done, but they are in good enough shape to share them with you all. And I wanted to go into just a little bit, to show you an example of is this the one? Yeah, identify unique needs and circumstances of online learners. So as one of the examples that this suggests is to begin the course with a getting to know you questionnaire. And I wanted to show you in the DLE, the SUNY DLE templates, one of the things that we have built into the asynchronous SUNY DLE template is an optional getting started or getting to know you or a welcome survey. I'm going to try and load this as a preview. And so it's an optional survey that's built into the asynchronous template where, and this is totally customizable by the instructor or by the institution, but where we're asking for the preferred name and pronouns. We're asking about how a person identifies in terms of race or ethnicity, how a person identifies in terms of their gender, and inquiring about what sorts of responsibilities the person has apart from the class, just to get a sense of competing life priorities, and also inquiring about any challenges that a learner might be facing during the course of the semester, so the instructor knows a little bit more about what might be going on in the life of the learners in the class, and then any concerns that they may have with technology that might prevent them from completing work, and then a question about their living situation, and goals for the course, and having the learners start to think about how they what they themselves think about how they could achieve their goals, and then anything else that the instructor would like, that the learner would like the instructor to know, in order to support their success in the course. So that is an example of one of the techniques that's being recommended in this particular course, in this particular inclusive teaching practices for identifying unique needs and circumstances of the online learners. So the suggestion is to do a little survey at the start of the class to get information from your students. And then the example was in the DLE templates, we have an optional one that you could, if you're using those DLE templates, or even if you're not, you can just build a little welcome or get to know you survey to try to encourage learners to share some of that information with you. All right, so let me go to the next one. And this one is, I wanted to show you, co-create an online learning community agreement. And I'm just gonna, so there's specific techniques here. A lot of about how to implement this practice, how you would actually go about doing this in an online teaching and learning environment. You're going to need to use some tools in order to brainstorm, and you're going to need to figure out how to discuss and build consensus around the agreement. And then you're going to need to figure out and agree on how it gets implemented. So there's a kind of a lot to this. And I wanted to show an example of a community agreement, just so that later at some point, if you're interested in community agreements, this is an example of one. And you can see the categories: language matters, one mic, one speaker, use I statements, and so forth. So this is just an example of one, so that you can have a sense of what a community agreement might look like. This was collaboratively co-created with a group of people, and this is what they have agreed is important in terms of how they interact in their community, in their learning community. The other example I wanted to show was our syllabus template. So this is something that is also part of the DLE templates that we have designed. And I wanted to point out a couple of things in this. This syllabus template is presented as a model. So you could check your own syllabus against some of the elements in this syllabus, or you could just take a copy of this and adapt it for your own purposes. But it includes the instructors' names and pronouns so that learners will feel comfortable sharing theirs with you. It includes a basic needs statement. It includes a section on making sure that learners know that you are interested in their names and pronouns as a component of the class. And then there's a couple of other interesting things in this template, just FYI. There's a section on regular and substantive interaction, which is important. And then there's another section on some language thoughts to get you thinking about how you might include the use of artificial intelligence in your coursework. And so there's a couple of sort of examples to get you thinking about it. It's not allowed maybe in your course or your department or your institution. Or maybe you're encouraging it in specific assignments and you're giving them some direction on how to do that. Or maybe you're encouraging it, really encouraging it use and making sure that they know they have to cite it and how to do that. So I just wanted to share this resource with you to let you know that it's there in case it made sense for you if you were interested in checking it out. So the last the last one that I wanted to chat with you about was this one on explaining unwritten rules and hidden curriculum. So this is a really interesting practice, and especially for first generation students or students who don't have a lot of experience or support in higher education environments, there are a lot of things that we assume being in higher education that people just know. And there's a lot of alphabet soup out there. There's a lot of acronyms and words like, what is a bursar, right? Like if you don't know what a bursar is, no matter how many times a person says that, you're not going to know. If you don't know what a discussion is or what to expect in an online discussion, you're not gonna be able to relate, to understand it. So making sure that you don't assume that everybody knows and understands all of the stuff that we as educators working in higher education know about. And it's not always intuitive, and it's not always, sort of in the forefront of our minds, but I think that this calls attention to the fact that it's important to know there are likely folks in the room that don't have that framework, don't have those lenses with which to know and understand what's going on. So this is another resource I found. It's a first gen dictionary. All these links, as I mentioned, are in the goodie bag that I am gonna give you at the end of this, which I think is already, we're at the end. I did want to share with you the collaborative document, and I'm inviting you to come in and think about how you build intentionally connection in your online instruction, and that there are the different inclusive teaching practices that are related to that higher level theme. And I want to recognize the expertise in the room and give you the opportunity to contribute to this. So if you do something that you'd like to share, I'd like you to document it here best you can, and then give us your name and institution and organization if you would be interested in sharing that information. And I have 3 sheets here. The other one is for inclusive online engagement with the same stuff. So here's your references. And then, whatever it is you might be doing that you're willing to share. And then the last one is about creating a sense of belonging. So you can also fill that in. These are editable. This document is editable. And let me grab the URL and give it to you. Yes, I know, Victoria. And I just want to pop the link to the Google Doc in the chat. And then the last thing I want to do is also give you the link to the goodie bag, which is here. And I want to thank everyone for attending and for your input and attention. There's the goodie bag. Thank you very much, everyone.